So I am Cynthia Overton. I live in Silver Spring, Maryland, and I am the author of a soon-to-be released book called Clear Cane Chronicles. The Clear Cane Chronicles: Shaping the Future of Healthcare Through Person-Centered Care. Okay, when I say I just finished it today, I mean like while Cindy was telling me about you, I was trying to sneak in a revision before my editor opened the Google Doc. That's how hot off the press it is. You were my first interview about this book, and I got to tell you, it is an amazing book, if I do say so myself. So essentially, the book is about person-centered care, the importance of person-centered care, and I tell it through my own story. So, you see that I use a cane, and I pretty much talk about my experience being in 3 different hospitals over 7 weeks and what it was like to have a AVM removed from my spinal cord, what it was like to go through recovery, what it was like to learn how to walk again, and what it was like to transition back into the community as somebody who used to be what I call a straight walker, part of the straight walking community, as somebody who transitioned as a person with a disability. And so this has been, oh gosh, a story that's 28 years in the making. And I have learned so much along the way. And I thought that it was important to document my experience and to amplify the importance of person-centered care. I use 2 different frameworks when I'm explaining this. A framework called the Picker, or from the Picker Institutes, is the Picker Principles of Person-Centered Care. They're based in England. And I use that framework as I describe receiving care in a clinical setting. And then I use the National Advisory Board's principles for independent living to really talk about, person-centered care from the perspective of a person with a disability living in the community. Initially, I really thought of it as an opportunity to just document my experience, almost like a memoir. But then I thought to myself, I think it's an interesting story, but I just thought it had so much meaning, which is why I found these frameworks. I shouldn't even say found. The Picker framework I found, I'm part of the National Advisory Board that created the other, or that developed the other principles. But essentially, I just thought it was important to A, tell my story, but B, talk about what this means in the broader sense when it comes to healthcare and how folks are receiving healthcare, but then also, kind of like from an insurance standpoint and what it's like, from the payer's perspective and how they can support person-centered care. So essentially, the book has 3 primary audiences: patients, providers, and payers. And every chapter is divided up. The first part of the chapter, I tell a little bit about my story, and then I connect my story to principles of person-centered care. And then after that, I have different questions for patients, different questions for providers, and different questions for payers. And here's what I think is super cool about my book. Okay, it tells a story, right? But it also draws in research to kind of support what I'm saying. But also make like different cultural references. Like you're never going to see a medical or book like this, or healthcare book that combines medical research and like Beyonce and Taylor Swift and Soul Train and all these different cultural references that, you might be used to in your everyday life, but you just wouldn't really expect it in a book like this. I remember when I was in the hospital, I'll just tell you very quickly about the story in terms of what happened to me. Everything was fine. And when I was 27 years old, I started walking like I walk right now with this cane. We didn't know what it was. It's 1997, 26, went to the hospital, went through the doctors. Doctors sent me to the hospital, went through all these tests, and they found a AVM, arterial malformation, in my spinal cord. It had to come out. Now, because it was 1997, the medical technologies had not advanced, and it was very hard to find a surgeon to do this type of operation. And I got to tell you, the process of finding a surgeon, getting the insurance company to pay for it. It was a wild ride, but I ended up finding, well, I didn't end up, my father ended up finding an amazing man named Dr. Fred Epstein, who was based in New York. This was back before the internet. In fact, I said it was my father, it was my sister-in-law. She found Dr. Epstein on LexisNexis, and he ended up doing the surgery, which I believe probably saved my life, just in terms of back then, people just didn't do this type of operation. After the surgery, I was paralyzed. I was a wheelchair user, and I had to go through intensive physical therapy, occupational therapy, and recreational therapy, which was a lot of fun when I was in the hospital. But, we had to navigate a lot of this. When I say we, my family, uh, in large part alone once we left the clinical setting in the community. So I talk about what it was like applying for Social Security benefits, what it was like going to vocational rehab, deciding, I have to really reconsider what I can do for work, given, my new reality of my body. And that's how I ended up in graduate school. That's how I eventually ended up to work with Cindy at the Model Systems Knowledge Translation Center. And in many ways, I consider my story a success story. A lot of that, though, honestly, has a lot to do with social drivers of health. If I were not born into the family that I was born into, my health outcomes would have probably been a lot different. Um, but, I think that my story might be able to help other folks. But more importantly, I really want patients, providers, and when I say providers, I mean healthcare professionals, and payers, meaning insurance folks, to really come to embrace these ideas of person-centered care. And I am not naive when I talk about these things in terms of I understand that providers are under tremendous stress and pressure. There's so many administrative tasks. And I know that there are a lot of people who work for insurance companies that actually really do want to help. I think that we're all just really trying to navigate a big old web of a system. And with my book, my hope is that folks might embrace a person-centered care approach to work in alignment with one another to work for better health outcomes for everybody. My website is cynthiaoverton.com, and I will be keeping that updated with information on the book, and I hope that we can connect on LinkedIn also.